The drinker's paradox is a logic puzzle that seems absurd at first glance, but makes perfect sense upon closer examination. It states that in any bar, there is at least one person, such that if that person drinks, everyone else in the bar drinks as well. This statement feels counterintuitive, almost ridiculous, but it is a valid logical conclusion based on how it is structured. To understand the drinker's paradox, it's essential to break it down step by step, examining how logic operates in this case and why such a surprising statement holds true. To begin, it's important to recognize that the paradox relies on a basic principle of formal logic, specifically the idea of implications. In logic, a statement of the form if A, then B is considered true unless A is true and B is false. This means that even if A never happens, the statement as a whole is still true. For example, take the statement, if it rains tomorrow, I will stay indoors. If it doesn't rain tomorrow, the statement is still true because the condition for testing it, rain, never occurs. This idea is central to understanding the drinker's paradox because the paradox hinges on how implications function, not on the practical realities of drinking behavior. Now, imagine a bar filled with people. Some are drinking, some are not. The claim is that there is at least one person in the bar, such that if that person drinks, everyone else drinks too. To illustrate, let's consider two scenarios. In the first, everyone in the bar is already drinking. In this case, the paradox is easily satisfied because the condition is trivially true. If everyone is drinking, you can pick any person in the bar, and the statement holds, if this person drinks, everyone drinks. Since everyone is already drinking, the condition is met without complication. The second scenario is more interesting. Not everyone in the bar is drinking. Perhaps some people are drinking and others are not. At first, it might seem impossible to find a person who satisfies the paradox, but the key lies in how the logical structure works. Consider one person who is not drinking. Let's call them Alex. The statement, if Alex drinks, everyone else drinks, is still logically valid because Alex is not drinking. Since the condition of Alex drinking is not met, the statement cannot be proven false, and it remains true by default. This is the counterintuitive part of the paradox. As long as the condition, Alex drinking, doesn't happen, the statement is logically satisfied. The drinker's paradox forces us to think about the difference between practical scenarios and logical ones. In real life, we might try to connect cause and effect, asking, how could one person's drinking influence everyone else in the bar? But the paradox is not concerned with causation. It only cares about the logical relationship between conditions. Whether or not people in the bar actually influence one another is irrelevant. What matters is that the statement, if this person drinks, then everyone drinks, can never be proven false, even if it feels strange or unrealistic. To make this even clearer, let's take a different example that follows the same logical structure. Imagine a park with a group of people. Someone claims there is at least one person in the park, such that if they clap their hands, everyone else claps too. This might sound impossible, but the logic holds. If no one claps, the condition is satisfied because the person's clapping never occurs, so the statement remains true by default. If everyone is already clapping, the condition is also satisfied. In either case, the logic checks out, even if the scenario feels disconnected from reality. The paradox is not just a playful puzzle. It also highlights how formal logic can produce results that seem counterintuitive. In everyday thinking, we often rely on intuition or practical reasoning, which can lead us to reject statements like the drinker's paradox as nonsensical. However, logic operates on strict rules that don't always align with our natural instincts. By examining cases like this one, we can see how logic follows its own internal consistency, even when the conclusions seem strange. The drinker's paradox also invites reflection on how we interpret language and reasoning. In natural language, statements often carry implied context or assumptions. For example, if someone says, if I win the lottery, I'll buy a car, we might assume they're talking about a realistic situation where they could win. But in formal logic, the statement is true even if they never buy a ticket. The drinker's paradox strips away these assumptions and forces us to engage with the raw mechanics of logical implication. It challenges us to think carefully about what we mean when we say something is true or false. One of the reasons the drinker's paradox is so intriguing is that it can apply to any situation where implications are involved. It doesn't have to be about drinking in a bar. The same reasoning applies to any condition paired with a universal statement. For instance, you could say, in any classroom, there is at least one student such that if they stand up, everyone else stands too. The structure is identical, and the logical conclusion remains valid. The specific details don't matter. What matters is how the logic is constructed. In philosophy, paradoxes like this one are useful tools for exploring the limits of reasoning. They show how logic can produce unexpected results and help clarify the difference between logical truth and practical truth. The drinker's paradox is especially valuable because it demonstrates how seemingly nonsensical statements can hold up under scrutiny. It teaches us to question our assumptions and approach problems with a more precise understanding of logic. Ultimately, the drinker's paradox is a reminder that logic doesn't always align with our expectations. It asks us to set aside common sense and focus on the structure of reasoning itself. By doing so, we gain a deeper appreciation for how logic works and why it sometimes leads us to surprising conclusions. Whether in a bar, a park, or a classroom, the paradox holds true, showing us that logic, even at its most counterintuitive, is a powerful tool for understanding the world. Imagine you are stranded on an island where every inhabitant belongs to one of two groups: truth tellers or liars. The truth tellers always tell the truth, while the liars always lie. On this island, you have a single task: figure out who belongs to which group. At first glance, this seems like it might be simple. Surely, you can just ask someone a question and deduce whether they are truthful or not. But as you start to think it through, the problem becomes more complex. If someone lies all the time, how do you know whether their answer is deceptive or not? What kind of questions could help you untangle the truth in such a scenario? The challenge begins when you realize that asking direct questions won't help. For example, if you ask someone, "Are you a truth teller?" both a truth teller and a liar would answer yes. A truth teller would truthfully say they tell the truth, while a liar, compelled to lie, would falsely claim to be a truth teller. You gain no useful information from this exchange. To solve this puzzle, you must think carefully about how to phrase your questions in a way that exploits the logic of the truth tellers and liars. A classic approach is to ask about what another person would say. Imagine there are two people on the island standing next to you. You could ask person A, "What would person B say if I asked them whether you are a truth teller?" This question creates a logical loop. A truth teller, when answering this question, will truthfully describe the liar's answer. A liar, on the other hand, will lie about what the truth teller would say. In either case, you can decode the truth by interpreting the response carefully. Here's how it works. If person A is a truth teller, they will truthfully state what person B, the liar, would say. Since person B always lies, they would claim that person A is a liar. Person A would then truthfully report, "Person B would say that I am a liar." If person A is a liar, they will lie about what person B, the truth teller, would say. In this case, person B would truthfully say that person A is a liar, but person A will lie about this and claim person B would say that I am a truth teller. By analyzing this response, you can determine who is who. A liar always manipulates the answer in a way that exposes their dishonesty if you follow the logic. This type of reasoning feels abstract, but it becomes clearer with practice. The key is to structure your questions so that the answer doesn't depend on whether the person is truthful or deceptive. Instead, the question forces them into a logical framework that reveals their nature. Questions like, "What would you say if I asked?" or "What would another person say about?" create layers of logic that uncover the truth. This island scenario is not just a fun puzzle, it illustrates how logic can be used to solve seemingly impossible problems. The truth tellers and liars problem has been studied for centuries, partly because it is simple to state but complex to solve. It is often used in philosophy and computer science to teach principles of logic, reasoning, and decision-making. It forces you to think beyond surface-level answers and consider the deeper structure of how information is conveyed. One of the most fascinating aspects of this puzzle is how it forces you to rely on indirect reasoning. Most of the time, we are accustomed to taking answers at face value or seeking direct information. On the island, however, direct questions fail because the truth and lies sound identical on the surface. This reflects a broader lesson about communication in the real world. People often frame statements in ways that can obscure their intentions. Learning to ask the right questions, questions that reveal more than they conceal, is a skill that applies far beyond the island. The problem also highlights the power of self-referential questions. By asking someone what another person would say, you create a scenario where both groups must indirectly expose themselves. This type of reasoning is closely related to the concept of metacognition, or thinking about thinking. It encourages you to step back and analyze how information flows and where the hidden truths lie. In some variations of the puzzle, the complexity increases. Imagine that there are not just truth tellers and liars, but also people who randomly alternate between truth and lies. Now, asking a single question may not be enough to determine someone's nature. You would need to ask a series of questions and look for consistency or patterns in their responses. This added layer of randomness mirrors real-world situations where people are not perfectly consistent in their behavior or statements. It teaches us to gather more evidence and analyze it over time, rather than relying on a single interaction. The beauty of the truth tellers and liars puzzle is its universality. While it appears simple on the surface, it challenges some of our most basic assumptions about communication, truth, and logic. It shows how even in situations where information is unreliable or contradictory, clear thinking and structured reasoning can cut through the confusion. It also emphasizes the importance of carefully framing your questions to get the answers you need. Imagine applying this principle to everyday life. While we don't often encounter people who always lie or always tell the truth, we do deal with incomplete, biased, or misleading information. Whether you're analyzing a news story, negotiating a deal, or resolving a conflict, the ability to structure your questions and think critically about the answers is invaluable. The truth tellers and liars puzzle serves as a reminder that how we ask questions can be just as important as the answers we receive. At its core, the puzzle is about clarity. It strips away unnecessary complexity and forces you to think logically. The rules are simple. One group always tells the truth, and the other always lies. Within those rules lies a world of complexity, nuance, and discovery. By navigating the puzzle, you learn not just how to solve a riddle, but how to approach problems with patience, curiosity, and a clear mind. The island of truth tellers and liars remains a timeless thought experiment. It challenges you to think beyond the obvious, to question your assumptions, and to look for answers in unexpected places. It's a reminder that even in a world full of contradictions, truth can be found if you know how to ask the right questions. The Epimenides paradox is a classic example of a self-referential statement that creates logical confusion. It originates from the statement made by Epimenides, a philosopher and poet from ancient Crete, who said, "All Cretans are liars." At first glance, this might seem straightforward, but when you think about it, a problem emerges. If Epimenides, a Cretan himself, is telling the truth, then his statement must be true. But if it's true, then all Cretans, including himself, are liars, which would make his statement false. This contradiction forms the heart of the paradox and has puzzled thinkers for centuries. The paradox works because it is self-referential. The statement refers to the speaker's own truthfulness, creating a loop that cannot logically resolve. If the statement is true, then it must be false, and if it is false, it cannot be true. This kind of logical problem is what makes the Epimenides paradox so intriguing and enduring. It forces us to confront the limitations of language, logic, and truth in ways that challenge our usual ways of thinking. To understand this paradox more deeply, it's helpful to think about similar examples. Consider the statement, "This sentence is false." If the sentence is true, then it must be false, because that is what the sentence claims. But if it's false, then it must actually be true, because a false statement about being false is in fact true. This type of loop, where a statement contradicts itself, is often called a liar paradox. It appears simple, but it creates a tangle that logic struggles to untie. The Epimenides paradox differs slightly from the standard liar paradox because it is tied to a group rather than just a single statement. By saying all Cretans are liars, Epimenides is making a broader claim about the nature of truthfulness within his own group. This adds another layer of complexity. If we assume that all Cretans really are liars, then Epimenides cannot be truthful. But if he is not truthful, his statement about all Cretans being liars is itself a lie, meaning not all Cretans are liars. This creates a cycle of logical inconsistencies. This paradox doesn't just exist as a philosophical curiosity. It has real implications for how we think about truth and self-reference. For example, in the world of mathematics and formal logic, self-referential systems often lead to contradictions. A famous example is Kurt Gödel's incompleteness theorems, which show that in any sufficiently complex system of mathematics, there will always be statements that cannot be proven true or false using the rules of the system itself. Gödel's work was inspired by paradoxes like the one posed by Epimenides, highlighting how these seemingly simple puzzles can have profound implications. Another way to explore the Epimenides paradox is by considering the role of assumptions. When we hear the statement, all Cretans are liars, we assume that it operates under the usual rules of truth and falsehood. But what if those rules don't apply in the way we expect? For instance, perhaps Epimenides meant something less literal, such as Cretans often lie, or Cretans are not entirely trustworthy. In that case, the statement might not be a paradox at all. It could just be an exaggeration or generalization. This shows how much the paradox relies on interpretation. The paradox also raises questions about the nature of lying itself. To call someone a liar suggests that they regularly or habitually tell falsehoods. But does that mean everything they say is false? Not necessarily. A person who lies often can still tell the truth sometimes. If we apply this idea to the Epimenides paradox, we might say that Epimenides, as a Cretan, could be lying about all Cretans being liars. But if he is lying, then some Cretans must tell the truth, which means his statement could still be partly correct. This blurs the line between truth and falsehood even further. One way to resolve the paradox is to shift the focus from logical absolutes to practical reasoning. In real life, people don't always speak in absolute terms. Statements like everyone lies or nobody is trustworthy are often understood as hyperbole, not literal truth. If we interpret Epimenides' statement this way, the paradox disappears. It becomes less about a logical contradiction and more about the complexities of human behavior and language. The paradox also connects to broader philosophical questions about self-reference and self-awareness. When someone makes a statement about themselves or their own group, they are both the observer and the observed. This creates a unique challenge for logic, which typically operates on the assumption that the subject and object of a statement are separate. By blurring this distinction, self-referential statements like all Cretans are liars reveal the limitations of traditional logic and force us to think in new ways. In modern times, the Epimenides paradox has been explored in fields beyond philosophy. In computer science, for instance, self-referential loops can cause problems in programming. A simple example is a piece of code that says, if true, repeat this command. Without a condition to break the loop, the program will run indefinitely, much like the logical loop created by the Epimenides paradox. This shows how self-reference, while fascinating, can create practical challenges in addition to theoretical ones. Despite its complexity, the Epimenides paradox offers valuable insights. It reminds us that language is not always as precise as we might like. Words can have multiple meanings, and context matters. It also shows that truth is not always black and white. A statement can be partly true, partly false, or even entirely dependent on how it is interpreted. By grappling with these ideas, we can develop a deeper understanding of how we communicate and think. Ultimately, the Epimenides paradox is a reminder that some questions don't have simple answers. It invites us to explore the boundaries of logic and to consider the ways in which our assumptions shape our understanding of the world. Whether we approach it as a philosophical puzzle, a linguistic curiosity, or a mathematical challenge, the paradox continues to inspire reflection and debate. It demonstrates that even the simplest statements can lead to profound and thought-provoking questions, challenging us to think beyond the limits of conventional reasoning. The two envelopes problem is a fascinating puzzle that challenges our understanding of probability, logic, and decision making. It begins with a simple scenario. You are presented with two envelopes, each containing some money. One envelope has exactly twice as much money as the other. You don't know which is which. You choose one envelope, but before you open it, you are given the option to switch to the other. At this point, the question arises, should you switch, or should you stick with your original choice? At first glance, the problem seems straightforward. You might think there's no reason to switch. After all, without knowing which envelope contains more money, both envelopes seem equally likely to hold the larger amount. Switching would appear to be a 50-50 gamble with no advantage gained. But then, a deeper consideration leads to confusion. Let's break it down. Suppose you open your chosen envelope and find $100 inside. If this is the smaller amount, the other envelope must contain $200. However, if this is the larger amount, the other envelope must contain $50. In this case, there's a 50% chance the other envelope holds $200 and a 50% chance it holds $50. On average, switching would give you an expected value of $125 because $200.5 plus $50.5 equals $125. This expected value is higher than the $100 you already have, so it seems like switching is the better choice. But here's the paradox. This logic applies no matter what amount you find in the first envelope. No matter how much money you see, switching always appears to offer a higher expected value. If that's true, then you should always switch. But if the logic applies equally to both envelopes, you could endlessly switch back and forth without ever resolving which envelope is better. This contradiction lies at the heart of the two envelopes problem. To understand where this reasoning goes wrong, we need to dig deeper into the assumptions. The key issue lies in the way probabilities are assigned to the amounts in the envelopes. In the example above, we implicitly assume that each amount has an equal chance of being the smaller or larger amount. But this assumption is problematic. If one envelope contains $100, the other must contain either $50 or $200, depending on whether $100 is the smaller or larger amount. However, the problem doesn't specify how the amounts are distributed initially. Without knowing this, we can't calculate meaningful probabilities. Let's consider another perspective. Suppose the two envelopes were filled according to a specific rule. For example, one envelope contains a randomly chosen amount, and the other contains double that amount. If the amounts were chosen in this way, you would need to know the range of possible values before you could assign probabilities. Without that range, it's impossible to determine whether switching is advantageous. This highlights another key feature of the problem. The paradox arises because we are trying to reason about probabilities without sufficient information. Some philosophers and mathematicians argue that the paradox doesn't reflect a real flaw in decision-making, but rather exposes the limitations of how we think about uncertainty. In practice, if you're given two envelopes with no additional context, you truly have no way of knowing whether switching is better or worse. The 50% probabilities assigned to each outcome are based on incomplete reasoning. They don't account for how the money was allocated between the envelopes in the first place. Another way to resolve the paradox is by considering symmetry. Before you open either envelope, the two options are indistinguishable. There is no information favoring one envelope over the other. This symmetry suggests that there's no rational reason to switch once you've chosen an envelope. Even after you open the first envelope and see a specific amount of money, the problem doesn't provide any new information about whether switching is beneficial. You still don't know how the amounts were distributed, so the situation remains symmetrical in terms of your knowledge. To illustrate this point, imagine playing this game repeatedly with different pairs of envelopes. Over time, you would notice that switching doesn't consistently lead to better outcomes. Some of the time, switching would result in a gain, and other times it would result in a loss. On average, the outcomes would balance out. This reinforces the idea that the initial choice and the decision to switch are equally valid strategies in the absence of additional information. Despite these explanations, The two envelopes problem continues to intrigue people because it challenges intuitive thinking. The paradox tricks our brains into seeing a pattern that isn't really there. The idea of expected value makes it seem like switching is always better, even though the underlying logic doesn't hold up under scrutiny. This tension between intuition and rational analysis is what makes the problem so compelling. The two envelopes problem also raises broader questions about how we handle uncertainty in everyday life. Decision making often involves incomplete information, and we must rely on assumptions to fill in the gaps. In some cases, these assumptions work well, but in others, they lead to errors or paradoxes like this one. The problem reminds us to carefully examine the reasoning behind our choices and to be cautious about overinterpreting probabilities when the underlying assumptions are unclear. Ultimately, the two envelopes problem isn't just a mathematical puzzle. It's a thought experiment that challenges us to think critically about probability, symmetry, and decision making. It highlights the importance of understanding the limits of our reasoning and the role of assumptions in shaping our conclusions. While the paradox may never have a definitive solution, it offers a valuable lesson in how to approach uncertainty with both logic and humility. The lottery coincidence is a thought experiment that forces us to question how we interpret improbable events. At its heart, it challenges our ability to distinguish between random chance and deliberate manipulation. Imagine you buy a lottery ticket, and against all odds, you win. The probability of this happening is so low that it feels like an extraordinary event. But now ask yourself, is it more likely that you legitimately won or that the lottery was rigged in your favor? This question might seem strange at first, but it reveals the tension between probability and our perceptions of chance. To break this down, let's start with the basics. In most lotteries, the odds of winning are astronomically low. For example, in a lottery with a 1 in a million chance of winning, there's a 0.001% probability that any single ticket is the winner. When you think about those odds, it seems almost impossible that you could win. Yet, someone inevitably does. Winning, despite the low odds, is an expected outcome when enough people participate. The key is understanding that improbability doesn't make an event impossible. Even the rarest events become likely when given enough opportunities to occur. Now let's flip the perspective. Imagine that you win, and someone accuses you of cheating. They claim the odds of you winning were so small that the only logical explanation is that the system was rigged. On the surface, this argument seems to make sense. The probability of winning is so low that it feels suspicious. But does that mean it's more likely that the lottery was manipulated? To answer this, you have to weigh two competing possibilities: the improbability of winning naturally versus the possibility of foul play. Here's where the thought experiment gets tricky. For the lottery to be rigged, someone would need the means, motive, and opportunity to manipulate the results. This introduces its own layer of complexity. If you examine the situation closely, you might realize that rigging a lottery, especially one heavily monitored by regulations, could be even less likely than winning it legitimately. The claim that the lottery was rigged needs evidence, but in its absence, the simpler explanation is that you just got lucky. This follows the principle of Occam's razor. When faced with competing explanations, the simplest one is usually correct. But let's push this further. Humans are wired to see patterns, even in randomness. This tendency, known as apophenia, makes us look for reasons behind events, especially improbable ones. When something unlikely happens, like winning a lottery, we instinctively search for meaning. We might think, why me? Was this fate? Or is there something I don't know? These questions arise because our brains struggle to accept randomness. We want events to have causes, and we're uncomfortable with the idea that some things just happen by chance. This discomfort becomes even more pronounced when the improbable event feels personal. If you win the lottery, it's not just a statistical anomaly, it's a life-changing moment. It's hard to see it as purely random because it directly affects you. This emotional reaction can make you question whether something deeper is at play. The lottery coincidence thought experiment highlights this bias, showing how our perceptions of probability are influenced by personal impact. Now, let's complicate the scenario further. Imagine you didn't just win the lottery, you won twice. The odds of this happening are astronomically low, yet it has occurred in real life. For instance, a woman in the United States won two major lottery jackpots within a few years. People were understandably skeptical. Statisticians pointed out that while the odds of winning twice are incredibly small, they're not zero. Given the millions of people who play the lottery, it's not impossible for such a rare event to occur somewhere. However, because the event is so unusual, it's easy to jump to conclusions about fraud or manipulation. This reaction reveals how we struggle to comprehend extreme improbability. The lottery coincidence also has broader implications for how we interpret events beyond lotteries. For example, think about coincidences in everyday life. You might run into an old friend in a city neither of you lives in, or you might dream about something that later happens. These events feel meaningful because they're unlikely. But are they truly significant, or are they just random occurrences that stand out because we notice them? The same logic applies to the lottery. Winning feels extraordinary, but it's only one possible outcome in a universe of possibilities. Another layer to this paradox is how we view systems of fairness. Lotteries are designed to be random, but their structure makes some outcomes inevitable. Someone has to win, even if the odds are low. This creates a tension between our expectations of fairness and the reality of chance. If a lottery winner is accused of cheating simply because their win was improbable, it undermines the entire premise of randomness. The thought experiment forces us to confront our biases about what we consider fair or suspicious. The lottery coincidence also raises questions about how we evaluate evidence. When we say something is unlikely, we're making a judgment based on probabilities. But probabilities are only part of the equation. Context matters too. If you know a lottery has strict safeguards, the odds of fraud might be lower than the odds of someone winning naturally. This context shapes how we interpret improbable events. It reminds us that probability alone doesn't determine what's true. We must also consider the circumstances. Ultimately, the lottery coincidence highlights the limits of human intuition when it comes to chance. We're not naturally good at understanding probability, and our emotions often cloud our judgment. The thought experiment challenges us to think critically about how we interpret unlikely events. It forces us to ask whether our suspicions are based on evidence or simply on our discomfort with randomness. The paradox doesn't have a definitive answer, which is what makes it so fascinating. It's not about proving whether the lottery was rigged or legitimate. It's about exploring how we think. It reveals the assumptions and biases that shape our understanding of the world. In doing so, it encourages us to question our perceptions and to approach improbability with both curiosity and skepticism. The lottery coincidence reminds us that life is full of rare events. Sometimes they're just luck. Other times, they may point to deeper patterns. The challenge is learning to tell the difference without letting our instincts lead us astray. Whether it's a lottery win, a chance encounter, or a strange coincidence, the improbable is a part of life. Understanding it helps us make sense of the world, even when the odds seem impossible. The paradox of identity asks a simple but profound question. What makes something the same over time? On the surface, this seems straightforward. A chair is still a chair tomorrow, and a person remains the same person from one day to the next. But when you look deeper, identity becomes far more complex. Objects change, people grow. Even the smallest shift in shape, function, or thought raises the question, is it still the same? Imagine a wooden ship that has been at sea for years. Over time, some of its planks rot and are replaced with new ones. I'd love to invite you to share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's incredible to think about how we're all connected through these stories and ideas. If you enjoy these thought-provoking explorations, consider subscribing to Tired Thinker so we can keep bringing you reflective narratives. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and let your imagination drift as we delve into the mind-boggling paradoxes and mysteries. This process continues until every single plank has been swapped out. Is it still the same ship? This is the classic ship of Theseus thought experiment. Some say it is the same ship because the process was gradual, and it still serves the same purpose. Others argue it is no longer the same because none of the original materials remain. The paradox deepens if you collect all the old planks and reassemble them into another ship. Now, which is the original? The one still afloat, or the one rebuilt from the old pieces? This problem is not limited to ships. It applies to everything, including people. Consider yourself. The cells in your body are constantly dying and being replaced. By some estimates, nearly every cell in your body is replaced over the span of 7 to 10 years. If your physical body is entirely new, are you still the same person? Most people would say yes, because your memories, personality, and sense of self remain intact. But memories and personality can change too. What happens when someone experiences memory loss or a dramatic shift in behavior? Are they still the same individual they once were? Another example is the modern issue of artificial replacements. Imagine a person who slowly replaces parts of their body with advanced prosthetics or synthetic organs. If they replace one arm, they are still the same person. But what if they replace both arms, then both legs, and eventually even their heart? If the brain remains the same, most would agree they are still the same person. But if the brain is gradually replaced with artificial parts, at what point do they stop being human? If the entire body and brain are eventually replaced, is the person still the same, or have they become something entirely different? The paradox also applies to objects. Think about a family heirloom, like a chair passed down through generations. Over time, pieces of the chair wear out and are repaired. A leg breaks and is replaced. The cushion is reupholstered. Eventually, every part of the chair is swapped out. Is it still the same heirloom? To the family, it might be because the meaning and memories attached to it remain. But to an outsider, it might look like an entirely different chair. This tension between material reality and emotional significance is at the heart of the paradox. The paradox of identity becomes even more challenging when applied to ideas. Take a book, for example. If you rewrite a novel one chapter at a time, adding new details and changing old ones, at what point does it become a new book? Or consider a country. Borders change, governments rise and fall, and populations shift, yet people continue to refer to it by the same name. Is it still the same country? In both cases, identity is tied to continuity and function rather than material sameness. This tension between physical change and continuity is why identity is so difficult to define. Some philosophers argue that identity is about persistence through time. As long as there is a clear connection between the past and the present, something remains the same. For example, a river is never made of the same water, but we call it the same river because its flow and location remain consistent. This view emphasizes the process and purpose over the material. Others argue that identity is rooted in the material or the original components. They would say the ship of Theseus ceases to be the same ship once all its parts are replaced. Similarly, a person who replaces their entire body and brain might no longer be the same person. This view focuses on the physical reality of what something is made of, rather than its continuity over time. In some cases, identity depends on perspective. For example, a classic car restored with entirely new parts might be considered the same car by its owner, but not by a collector looking for originality. A musician performing under the same band name, even after all the original members have left, might still be seen as the same band by fans, but not by critics. These examples show how identity is often shaped by context and interpretation rather than objective facts. The paradox of identity has practical implications. In medicine, for instance, debates arise about what defines a person in cases of severe brain injury or advanced dementia. If someone loses their memories and personality, are they still the same individual? This question influences decisions about care, autonomy, and even legal responsibility. In technology, the rise of artificial intelligence and machine learning raises questions about whether machines can develop identities. If a computer program evolves over time, at what point does it become something new? The paradox also challenges our understanding of ourselves. Most people think of their identity as stable and unchanging, but this is an illusion. People grow and adapt constantly. The person you are today is not the same as the person you were 10 years ago. Your values, beliefs, and preferences evolve with time and experience, yet you still think of yourself as you. This continuity is a product of memory and narrative. you create a story about who you are, connecting your past, present, and future into a coherent whole. This story helps you navigate life even if the details change over time. At its core, the paradox of identity forces us to confront the fluid nature of existence. Nothing remains completely the same, yet we cling to the idea of permanence. This tension is part of what makes life so rich and complex. It reminds us that identity is not a fixed property, but a process. Whether it's a ship, a person, or an idea, identity is shaped by continuity, function, and perception. Understanding this can help us appreciate the beauty of change while still valuing the connections that give meaning to our lives. In the end, the paradox of identity does not have a clear resolution. It challenges us to think deeply about what makes something or someone the same over time. Whether we focus on material components, continuity, or perspective, the answer will always depend on context. This lack of certainty is what makes the paradox so compelling. It reveals the complexity of the world and our struggle to make sense of it. And perhaps that struggle in itself is part of what defines us. Imagine a machine that can give you the perfect life. Once you step inside, you're connected to a system that stimulates your brain in a way that feels completely real. It creates a world where everything goes exactly the way you want. You experience happiness, success, and fulfillment without the challenges or pain of the real world. This is the premise of the experience machine, a thought experiment introduced by philosopher Robert Nozick. It asks a simple but profound question. If you could plug into such a machine, would you? At first, the idea sounds appealing. Who wouldn't want a perfect life? The machine can give you any experience you desire. You could feel the joy of achieving your biggest dreams, whether it's becoming a world-renowned artist, exploring the stars, or finding true love. In this virtual reality, everything feels just as real as it does outside the machine. You wouldn't know you were connected to it. For all you're aware, this perfect life is your reality. The only decision you have to make is whether to step inside. But something about this choice feels unsettling. If everything is perfect, why hesitate? The machine guarantees happiness, so shouldn't it be an obvious decision? Yet, for many people, the idea of plugging in doesn't sit right. There's a nagging sense that something important would be lost. But what exactly would that be? One concern is authenticity. When you're in the machine, the experiences aren't real. Sure, they feel real, but they're not. If you win an Olympic gold medal in the machine, you didn't actually train for it or compete. The machine made you feel like you did, but the achievement isn't genuine. Many people value authenticity in their lives. They want their accomplishments to be earned, not handed to them by a device. This makes the idea of living in the machine less appealing. It's like the difference between climbing a mountain yourself and being flown to the top. The view might be the same, but the experience is fundamentally different. Another issue is the loss of connection to the real world. In the machine, you're alone. The people you interact with aren't real, they're simulations. They might seem like friends or family, but they're not truly there. In the real world, relationships are built through shared experiences, trust, and vulnerability. These connections give life meaning. If you're in the machine, those connections disappear. Even if the machine makes you feel loved, it's not the same as being loved by a real person. There's also the question of personal growth. Life is full of challenges, and those challenges shape who you are. Struggling with failure, overcoming obstacles, and learning from mistakes are all part of being human. They build resilience, empathy, and wisdom. In the machine, those struggles don't exist. Everything goes your way, so you never have to grow or adapt. While this might sound pleasant, it raises the question of whether you can truly appreciate happiness without experiencing hardship. Is a life without challenges really fulfilling, or does it lose some of its depth? The experience machine also brings up questions about freedom. When you're in the machine, your life is pre-programmed. You're not making real choices because the machine is deciding everything for you. Even though it feels like you're in control, you're not. This loss of agency is troubling to many people. Part of what makes life meaningful is the ability to make decisions and shape your own path. In the machine, that freedom is an illusion. Some argue that plugging into the machine would be selfish. While you're living a perfect life, the real world continues. Problems like poverty, injustice, and environmental destruction still exist, but you're no longer part of the solution. By choosing the machine, you're choosing to ignore those issues and focus only on your own happiness. For people who find meaning in helping others, this would make the machine an unacceptable choice. On the other hand, there are those who argue that plugging into the machine isn't all that different from how we already live. People pursue pleasure, success, and happiness in their everyday lives. They seek out entertainment, relationships, and achievements to feel fulfilled. If the machine provides those things more effectively, why not use it? If happiness is the ultimate goal, the machine seems like a shortcut to achieving it. But happiness might not be the only goal. Nozick's thought experiment suggests that people value more than just feeling good. They value reality, growth, connection, and freedom. These things can involve discomfort, pain, and struggle, but they also bring meaning to life. The machine eliminates the bad, but it also takes away the good that comes from overcoming adversity and engaging with the real world. It replaces genuine experiences with artificial ones, and for many, that trade-off is too steep. The thought experiment doesn't have a right or wrong answer. It's designed to make you think about what matters most to you. Is happiness enough, or do you need something more? Would you choose a perfect illusion over an imperfect reality? The experience machine forces us to confront these questions and examine our values. Even if you decide not to plug into the machine, the idea challenges you to think about how you live your life. Are you chasing experiences that feel good in the moment but lack real substance? Are you prioritizing authenticity, growth, and connection, even when they're difficult? The machine might not exist, but the choices it represents are very real. Ultimately, the experience machine highlights the complexity of human desires. We want happiness, but we also want meaning. We want comfort, but we also want challenge. We want control, but we also want spontaneity. Life is a balancing act between these competing desires, and the thought experiment reminds us that there are no easy answers. Whether or not you would plug into the machine, thinking about it can help you clarify what truly matters in your life. Quantum suicide is a thought experiment that combines the principles of quantum mechanics with the nature of reality and observation. It is a deeply unsettling concept that pushes the boundaries of how we think about life, death, and the universe itself. The idea starts with the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which suggests that every possible outcome of a quantum event happens in its own separate universe. In simple terms, every decision or event that could go one way or another creates a branching of realities, each one existing as its own timeline. To understand quantum suicide, it's important to grasp how this interpretation connects with the act of observation. In quantum mechanics, particles can exist in multiple states at once, a concept known as superposition. However, the moment an observer measures or interacts with the particle, it chooses a definite state. This interaction between observation and reality is central to understanding how quantum mechanics works. The quantum suicide thought experiment takes this principle to a much darker place. Imagine a scenario where a person sets up an experiment similar to Schrödinger's cat, but instead of a cat in the box, the person performing the experiment is directly involved. The setup involves a machine that is connected to a quantum event, such as the spin of a particle. If the particle spins one way, the machine triggers a lethal event. If it spins the other way, nothing happens, and the person survives. The many worlds interpretation comes into play because every time the particle's spin is measured, the universe splits into two, one where the person dies and one where they live. From an outside perspective, this experiment seems straightforward. The person either survives or doesn't, and the probabilities play out as they would in any random event. However, from the perspective of the individual inside the experiment, things become far more bizarre. In the universes where the person dies, their consciousness ceases to exist. They can only ever experience the universes in which they survive. If the experiment is repeated enough times, the many worlds interpretation suggests that the person will always find themselves in the universe where they survive. To the individual, it might seem as though they are invincible, constantly jumping to the branches of reality where they continue to live. This leads to the concept of quantum immortality. The theory implies that an individual's consciousness can only exist in realities where they are alive. While death occurs in countless other universes, the person will only experience the branches where they remain alive, no matter how unlikely survival becomes. To an observer outside the experiment, the probabilities of survival diminish with each trial, and the eventual outcome is certain death. But to the person performing the experiment, their experience is one of continual survival, as though they are immune to the event's deadly consequences. The implications of this thought experiment are unsettling and difficult to accept. It challenges how we think about life and death, suggesting that individual consciousness is tied to specific branches of reality. If quantum immortality were true, it would mean that from the perspective of each individual, death is never experienced. Instead, their consciousness would always shift to a reality where they continue to exist. This doesn't mean that a person is physically immortal. Countless versions of them still die in other universes. It simply means that the experience of death is avoided by jumping between realities. This idea is troubling for several reasons. First, it raises questions about the nature of identity and consciousness. If your consciousness shifts to a new branch of reality every time you face death, are you still the same person? How do these branching realities affect the continuity of who you are? Second, it suggests that death, at least from the perspective of the individual, may not be as final as we currently believe. The concept of quantum immortality challenges our understanding of mortality and forces us to consider whether our perception of life is tied to a much larger, more complex system. Quantum suicide and quantum immortality are not scientific experiments. They are theoretical ideas meant to explore the implications of quantum mechanics and the many worlds interpretation. No one can or should attempt to test these concepts. The thought experiment is a way of grappling with the strange and often counterintuitive nature of quantum physics. It helps illustrate the potential consequences of a theory where every possible outcome creates a new universe. The idea also highlights the limitations of human understanding. Quantum mechanics operates on principles that often defy common sense. Concepts like superposition, entanglement, and wave-particle duality challenge our everyday experiences of how the world works. Quantum suicide takes these ideas to an extreme, forcing us to confront what it means to exist in a universe governed by such rules. It blurs the line between science, philosophy, and metaphysics, creating a space where our understanding of reality feels incomplete. Critics of the thought experiment argue that it misinterprets quantum mechanics and stretches the many worlds interpretation beyond its intended scope. The concept of quantum immortality assumes that consciousness plays a special role in selecting branches of reality. This idea is not supported by scientific evidence and remains purely speculative. Additionally, the thought experiment raises ethical and philosophical concerns. It uses the concept of death in a way that feels abstract, ignoring the profound emotional and physical realities of mortality. Despite these criticisms, quantum suicide remains a fascinating and provocative idea. It forces us to think about the implications of quantum mechanics in new and unsettling ways. It also reminds us that our understanding of the universe is still evolving. The many worlds interpretation is just one way to explain quantum phenomena, and it may not be the correct one. Other interpretations, such as the Copenhagen interpretation or pilot wave theory, offer different perspectives on how reality works. In the end, quantum suicide is less about proving a point and more about asking questions. It challenges us to think about the nature of reality, the role of observation, and the limits of human understanding. While it remains a thought experiment, it serves as a reminder of the complexity and mystery of the universe. Whether or not the many worlds interpretation is correct, the idea of quantum suicide shows how deeply quantum mechanics can shape our understanding of life, death, and everything in between. Parfit's teleporter is a thought experiment that challenges our understanding of personal identity. It asks a simple yet unsettling question. If you use a teleporter to travel from one place to another, are you still the same person when you arrive? At first glance, it might seem obvious that you would be the same. After all, Teleportation is just a form of transportation, like a car or a plane. But the way the teleporter works in this thought experiment introduces a deeper problem, one that forces us to reconsider what it means to be you. Imagine you step into a teleporter. The machine scans your body, mapping every molecule and atom in exact detail. It records everything: the way your cells are arranged, your brain's connections, your memories, your personality. Then, it destroys your physical body at the starting point and sends all the recorded information to a destination. At the destination, another machine uses this information to rebuild your body exactly as it was. The person who steps out of the teleporter looks, thinks, and acts just like you. They remember everything you did, know everyone you know, and feel like the same person who stepped into the teleporter. But is it really you? The problem lies in the destruction of your original body. If your physical body is annihilated and a new body is created elsewhere, is the new body still you, or is it just a perfect copy? Philosophers like Parfit argue that this raises questions about what it means to be the same person over time. Is your identity tied to your physical body, or is it something more abstract, like your memories and personality? If the copy at the destination is identical in every way, does it even matter if the original was destroyed? Some people argue that the person who steps out of the teleporter is you. They point out that every cell in your body is already replaced over time. The you that existed 10 years ago no longer physically exists, but you still feel like the same person because your memories and consciousness have remained continuous. In this view, the teleporter simply speeds up a process that is already happening slowly. The copy at the destination is still you because it continues the same pattern of memories, thoughts, and experiences. Others disagree. They argue that destroying the original body breaks the chain of continuity. The person who steps out of the teleporter might believe they are you, but they are not the same person who stepped into the machine. Instead, they are a copy, a new person who starts their life at the moment they step out. The original you has been destroyed. In this view, teleportation is less like transportation and more like death followed by cloning. To make the problem even more complex, imagine the teleporter malfunctions. Instead of destroying your original body, it creates a copy at the destination while leaving the original intact. Now there are two of you, one at the starting point and one at the destination. Both have the same memories and believe they are the real you. Which one is the true version of you? If your identity is tied to your physical body, perhaps the original is the real you. But if your identity is based on your memories and personality, then both versions are equally you, even though they are now two separate individuals. This scenario highlights the tension between two ideas about personal identity. One idea, called the body view, says that your identity is tied to your physical body. The other, called the psychological view, says that your identity depends on the continuity of your memories, thoughts, and consciousness. Parfit's teleporter challenges both views by creating situations where the usual markers of identity, your body and your mind, no longer align in the way we expect. If we accept that the teleporter creates a perfect copy, we are forced to confront some uncomfortable implications. If the copy is truly you, then what does it mean to say that you exist? Does your sense of self rely on something deeper than physical or psychological continuity, something that cannot be copied? Or is the idea of a fixed, unchanging self an illusion? Parfit's experiment suggests that identity might not be as concrete as we like to believe. Instead, it might be a matter of perspective, a story we tell ourselves to make sense of our experiences. Some philosophers use this thought experiment to argue that personal identity is not what matters. They suggest that what really matters is the continuation of your experiences and memories, even if the physical or psychological continuity is interrupted. If the person who steps out of the teleporter feels like you, remembers your life, and behaves as you would, then for all practical purposes, they are you. From this perspective, the destruction of the original body is not a significant problem because the essence of you continues in the copy. Others are less comfortable with this conclusion. They point out that the teleporter raises ethical questions. If the original body is destroyed, is that equivalent to murder? Even if the person who steps out feels like you, Does the destruction of the original violate your rights? And if both the original and the copy exist simultaneously, do they both have equal claims to your identity? These questions show how Parfit's teleporter blurs the boundaries of identity, forcing us to think about what it really means to be a person. Parfit's teleporter also has implications for technology and the future. If teleportation became a reality, how would society respond? Would people use teleporters without hesitation, trusting that their identity remains intact? Or would the destruction of the original body create a sense of unease, making teleportation a controversial technology? The thought experiment also raises questions about cloning, brain uploading, and artificial intelligence. If a copy of your brain could be uploaded to a computer, would that copy still be you? These ideas might seem futuristic, but they challenge us to think about the limits of identity and consciousness. In the end, Parfit's teleporter is not about finding a definitive answer. It's about exploring the complexities of personal identity and the assumptions we make about ourselves. It invites us to question whether our sense of self is tied to something physical, psychological, or something else entirely. The experiment forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about continuity, consciousness, and what it means to exist. While there may never be a clear resolution, the thought experiment reminds us that identity is not as simple as it seems. It challenges us to look beyond the surface and think deeply about who we are. Imagine a pill that could erase your bad memories. It wouldn't harm you physically, and it wouldn't alter your ability to function in day-to-day life. It would simply remove the memories of your most painful experiences, leaving you with a clean slate. You could let go of the moments that haunt you, the loss of a loved one, a betrayal, or a deep personal failure. But here's the question. Would taking that pill make you happier, or would it take away something essential to who you are? At first glance, the idea seems appealing. Painful memories can weigh us down, replaying in our minds and making us relive moments we'd rather forget. For someone struggling with the aftermath of a traumatic event, the pill might feel like a miracle. Imagine a person haunted by the memory of a serious car accident. They might find it hard to drive again, or even to sit in a car. The pill could take away the memory of the crash entirely, freeing them from the anxiety and fear that comes with it. Life could feel easier, simpler, and lighter. But then another question arises. If you erase the bad memories, what happens to the lessons you learned from them? Every painful experience teaches us something, even if the lesson isn't immediately clear. That same person who survived a car accident might have developed a deeper appreciation for life or a stronger sense of resilience. If they took the pill, they might lose the pain, but they could also lose the growth that came with it. Pain, for all its difficulty, shapes us. It forces us to adapt, to reflect, and to find meaning in our struggles. There's also the question of identity. Who are you without your memories? Our experiences, both good and bad, make up the story of our lives. They influence our decisions, our relationships, and even how we see ourselves. If you erase the difficult parts of that story, do you become someone new? Imagine a person who has spent years overcoming a tough breakup. That experience might have taught them what they value in a partner and what they want in a relationship. If they take the pill, they might forget the pain of the breakup, but they might also forget the clarity it brought. Would they lose part of themselves in the process? Another consideration is the long-term impact of erasing bad memories. If you forget the pain, does that mean you're more likely to make the same mistakes? Someone who erases the memory of a failed business venture might lose the lessons they learned about managing risk or making smarter decisions. Without those lessons, they might find themselves in similar situations, repeating patterns they no longer remember. Painful memories often serve as warnings, guiding us away from harmful choices. If those warnings disappear, do we lose the ability to grow and change? At the same time, it's important to acknowledge that some memories are so painful they seem unbearable. Trauma can leave deep scars that don't easily heal. For people who experience post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, certain memories can disrupt their lives entirely. Nightmares, flashbacks, and anxiety can make even ordinary tasks feel impossible. In cases like these, the pill might feel like the only way to regain a sense of normalcy. It raises the question of whether the value of keeping painful memories always outweighs the harm they cause. Let's consider a different angle. What if someone only erased a single bad memory, but kept the rest of their experiences intact? For example, imagine someone who regrets a single decision that led to the loss of a friendship. They feel guilt and sadness every time they think about it, but they've already learned the lesson it taught them. Would erasing just that memory improve their quality of life? Or would they always sense that something important was missing, even if they couldn't name it? The complexity of memory means that even removing a single moment could have ripple effects on other parts of a person's life. The science of memory complicates the dilemma even further. Memories aren't static. Every time we recall an event, our brains subtly alter it. Over time, memories become less accurate and more influenced by emotions, biases, and even new experiences. In some cases, the emotional weight of a bad memory can grow heavier simply because we've replayed it so many times. If this is true, does erasing the memory solve the problem? Or does it simply remove the chance to reinterpret and process it over time? There's also a moral dimension to the sleeping pill dilemma. If people had the ability to erase their bad memories, how would that change society? Would people take less responsibility for their actions, knowing they could simply forget the consequences? Would relationships become more fragile if people erased the pain of arguments or betrayals instead of working through them? On a larger scale, would entire communities choose to forget painful chapters of history rather than confront and learn from them? Memory isn't just personal, it's also collective. It shapes how we grow as individuals and as a society. The sleeping pill dilemma forces us to confront the nature of happiness. Is happiness the absence of pain, or is it something deeper? True happiness often comes from finding meaning, even in difficult times. A person who has experienced loss might still find joy in the memories of their loved one or in the resilience they built through grief. If they erased the pain, would the joy remain? Happiness and pain are often intertwined, making it hard to separate one from the other. Ultimately, the sleeping pill dilemma is about choice. Some people might choose to take the pill, valuing the relief it offers over the lessons and identity tied to their pain. Others might choose to keep their memories, no matter how painful, seeing them as essential to their growth and understanding of life. Neither choice is inherently right or wrong. It depends on the person and the nature of their experiences. The dilemma doesn't have a clear answer, and perhaps that's the point. It invites us to reflect on what it means to be human. We are shaped by our memories, yet we are not defined by them. We carry our pain, but we also find ways to heal and move forward. The sleeping pill may not exist in real life, but the questions it raises are real. Would you erase your pain if you could? Or would you choose to carry it, knowing it's part of who you are? That's a question only you can answer. The duck-rabbit problem is a thought experiment that challenges the way we perceive and interpret the world around us. At its core, it's about how the same image can be seen in two completely different ways, depending on how we choose to look at it. The famous drawing at the center of this problem is a simple line illustration. Some people see it as a duck, while others see it as a rabbit. The magic of the image is that it can be both, but not at the same time. You can flip between seeing the duck and the rabbit, but your brain cannot hold both interpretations simultaneously. This simple visual trick opens up deep questions about perception, reality, and how we make sense of the world. The image itself is straightforward. On one side, there's what appears to be a duck's bill, and on the other, two shapes that could easily be interpreted as rabbit ears. When someone first looks at the drawing, their brain immediately makes a decision about what it is. This decision is automatic and influenced by experience, context, and even cultural background. For instance, if you show the image during Easter, people might be more likely to see a rabbit. If it's near a pond or in a story about ducks, they might see a duck instead. The context surrounding the image can subtly nudge the mind in one direction without us even realizing it. The duck-rabbit problem was popularized by the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein in his book Philosophical Investigations. Wittgenstein used the drawing to illustrate a key idea about how humans interpret the world. He argued that perception is not just about seeing, but also about interpreting what we see. When you look at the duck rabbit image, your brain doesn't simply take in the visual information. Instead, it actively decides what the image is. This decision-making process happens so quickly that we often don't notice it. However, the duck rabbit reminds us that what we see isn't always an objective truth. Instead, it's a combination of the raw data from our senses and the interpretations our minds impose on it. This raises an important question. How much of what we see is shaped by our expectations and assumptions? In the case of the duck rabbit, you can switch your interpretation if someone points out the alternative view. If you see the duck first, someone might say, "But can you see the rabbit?" Suddenly, your brain makes a shift and the image changes. The drawing hasn't changed, but your perception of it has. This ability to flip between interpretations shows how flexible our minds can be. It also highlights how easily our perception can be influenced by external input. The duck-rabbit problem doesn't just apply to images. It's a metaphor for how we interpret the world in general. In life, we often encounter situations or ideas that can be seen in multiple ways. What looks like a problem to one person might be an opportunity to another. A decision that seems wise today might seem foolish in hindsight. The way we frame something, how we choose to see it, can completely change our experience of it. Just like the duck rabbit, many things in life don't have a single, fixed meaning. Instead, they are open to interpretation. This idea can be applied to everyday situations. Imagine you're driving and someone cuts you off in traffic. Your first interpretation might be that the driver is rude or reckless. But what if there's another explanation? Maybe they're rushing to an emergency. The same event, a car cutting you off, can be seen in two very different ways depending on how you frame it. Like the duck rabbit, the event itself doesn't change, but your interpretation of it does. This flexibility in perception is a powerful tool. It reminds us that we have the ability to shift our perspective and see things in a new light. The duck-rabbit problem also has implications for how we communicate with others. When two people disagree about something, it's often because they're interpreting the same situation in different ways. One person might see the duck, while the other sees the rabbit. Neither interpretation is wrong, but they are different. Recognizing this can help us approach disagreements with more empathy. Instead of insisting that our view is the only correct one, we can try to understand how someone else might see the same situation differently. This doesn't mean we have to agree with them, but it opens the door to better understanding. Psychologists have studied the duck rabbit and similar images to explore how the brain works. These studies show that perception is not a passive process. Our brains don't simply record the world like a camera. Instead, they actively interpret and construct reality based on the information they receive. This process is influenced by past experiences, cultural norms, and even our current mood. For example, if someone is feeling happy, they might be more likely to see the duck rabbit as something playful or interesting. If they're feeling frustrated, they might see it as confusing or irritating. This shows how deeply personal perception can be. The duck rabbit problem also connects to bigger philosophical questions about reality. If two people can look at the same image and see different things, what does that say about the nature of reality itself? Is there an objective truth, or is everything a matter of interpretation? Wittgenstein used the duck rabbit to argue that meaning is not inherent in objects, but is created by how we use and interpret them. This idea challenges the notion that there is a single, absolute way to view the world. Instead, it suggests that reality is more fluid and subjective than we might think. In a broader sense, the duck-rabbit problem encourages us to stay curious and open-minded. When we encounter something new, it's easy to rely on our first interpretation and assume it's correct. But the duck-rabbit reminds us that there might be another way to see things. By staying open to alternative perspectives, we can expand our understanding and appreciate the complexity of the world. This doesn't mean abandoning our own views, but it does mean recognizing that they are not the only ones. The duck-rabbit problem is a simple drawing, but it holds profound lessons about perception, interpretation, and the nature of reality. It shows us that what we see is not always what's there, and that the way we frame something can change its meaning entirely. Whether we're looking at an image, navigating a disagreement, or interpreting an event in our lives, the duck rabbit reminds us to consider multiple perspectives. In doing so, we can better understand not only the world around us, but also the minds that shape how we see it. The preference paradox is a thought experiment that challenges the way we think about our choices and freedom. It suggests that by always making what seems like the most rational or optimal choice, we may actually lose the essence of true freedom. At first glance, this idea seems counterintuitive. Isn't freedom about being able to choose what we want when we want? But the paradox reveals a deeper issue. If our preferences are entirely shaped by external factors or internal logic, are we truly free, or are we just following a predetermined path? Imagine a person standing in front of two doors. One leads to a room filled with all their favorite things: comfortable furniture, delicious food, and entertainment they enjoy. The other door leads to a completely random experience. It could be better, worse, or simply different from what they are used to. A rational person would likely choose the first door because it guarantees comfort and happiness based on what they know they like. But what happens when they keep making this choice over and over? By always selecting what is familiar and comfortable, they may unknowingly trap themselves in a bubble of predictable experiences. They never explore the unknown, and their preferences begin to define and limit their world. Now consider how preferences are formed. People often believe their choices are entirely their own, but preferences are shaped by upbringing, culture, and environment. For example, someone who grows up eating a specific cuisine might prefer those flavors as an adult. Their preference feels personal, but it's rooted in their background. Similarly, societal trends influence what people find attractive, valuable, or desirable. A preference for one thing over another might feel like a free choice, but it could be the result of years of conditioning. If preferences are shaped by external forces, are we truly making free decisions when we follow them? The paradox becomes even clearer when we think about optimization. In today's world, people are encouraged to make the best choices, whether it's in their careers, relationships, or even their leisure activities. Technology plays a big role in this. Algorithms on streaming platforms, shopping sites, and social media recommend content based on past preferences. These recommendations often feel helpful because they align with what we already like. But over time, they narrow our experiences. If every movie you watch is recommended based on your past choices, you might never discover a film outside your comfort zone. The same applies to music, books, or even news. The effort to optimize every choice can create a feedback loop where your world becomes smaller and less diverse. This leads to a question. Is following our preferences always the right thing to do? The preference paradox suggests that it's not. True freedom might require stepping outside of what feels natural or logical. It means choosing something not because it's the best option, but because it's different. By doing so, we expose ourselves to new experiences, ideas, and possibilities that could reshape our preferences altogether. Imagine someone who always prefers one genre of music but decides to attend a concert in a completely different style. They might discover they enjoy it, expanding their world in ways they couldn't have predicted. A famous philosophical thought experiment helps illustrate this point. Imagine a machine that can perfectly simulate any experience you desire. You can plug into this machine and live out your ideal life, a life filled with pleasure, satisfaction, and success. Most people would hesitate to use the machine because they know the experiences wouldn't be real. Even though the machine fulfills every preference, something feels wrong about giving up the unpredictability of real life. This thought experiment shows that people value more than just satisfying their preferences. They value the freedom to explore, change, and grow, even if it means facing uncertainty. The preference paradox also highlights the role of spontaneity. Some of life's best moments come from unexpected choices. Think about meeting a new friend, finding a hidden spot on a road trip, or trying an activity you never thought you'd enjoy. These moments happen not because they align with your existing preferences, but because you stepped outside of them. If we always act rationally based on what we think we like, we risk missing out on these serendipitous experiences. At the heart of the paradox is the tension between rationality and freedom. Rationality tells us to optimize our choices, to do what makes sense based on what we know about ourselves. Freedom, on the other hand, involves the ability to make choices that don't always follow logic. It's about embracing the unknown and the unpredictable. The paradox suggests that true freedom requires a balance between the two. It's not about rejecting preferences altogether, but recognizing when they limit us and choosing to step beyond them. This idea has practical implications for how we live our lives. It challenges us to question our habits and routines. Why do we make the choices we make? Are they truly ours, or are they shaped by external influences? Are we stuck in patterns that feel comfortable but prevent growth? By asking these questions, we can become more aware of the forces shaping our preferences and begin to take control of them. For example, consider someone who always orders the same dish at their favorite restaurant. They enjoy it, so it feels like the logical choice. But what if they tried something new? They might not like it as much, but they might also discover a new favorite. The point isn't to abandon what we like, but to leave room for exploration. Life becomes richer when we allow ourselves to be surprised. Another example is in relationships. People often gravitate toward others who share similar interests and values. While this creates comfort and compatibility, it can also limit growth. By connecting with people who challenge our views or come from different backgrounds, we expand our understanding of the world. These relationships might not align with our initial preferences, but they can lead to profound personal growth. The preference paradox also applies to decision-making on a larger scale. In a society that values efficiency and optimization, there's a tendency to prioritize short-term gains over long-term exploration. Companies might focus on products they know will sell instead of taking risks on innovative ideas. Governments might favor policies that maintain stability over those that challenge the status quo. While these choices make sense in the moment, they can stifle creativity and progress. The paradox reminds us that freedom and growth often come from the unexpected. It encourages us to embrace uncertainty and see value in the unfamiliar. This doesn't mean abandoning all preferences or logic. It means recognizing when our preferences become a cage and choosing to break free. Ultimately, the preference paradox invites us to rethink what it means to live freely. It shows us that true freedom isn't about always making the best or most logical choice. It's about the ability to step beyond our preferences, to explore new possibilities, and to embrace the unknown. By doing so, we create a life that is richer, more diverse, and more meaningful. The Twin Earth thought experiment is a fascinating way to explore the relationship between meaning, language, and perception. It was proposed by philosopher Hilary Putnam in 1975 to challenge how we think about meaning and reference in language. At its core, the experiment asks a simple yet profound question: how does the meaning of a word depend on the world we live in? By imagining a hypothetical scenario, the thought experiment reveals deep insights into how our minds interact with the external world and how meaning is tied to context. To understand the thought experiment, imagine there are two planets, Earth and Twin Earth. Twin Earth is identical to Earth in almost every way. The geography, climate, and even the people are exactly the same. There is only one key difference. On Twin Earth, what looks and functions like water is not H2O. Instead, it is made of a different chemical compound, which we will call XYZ. This Twin Earth water behaves like regular water. It is clear, drinkable, and fills the oceans, rivers, and lakes, but its chemical structure is completely different from the water we know on Earth. On Twin Earth, the word water refers to XYZ, while on Earth, it refers to H2O. Now imagine a person living on Earth in 1750, before anyone knew about chemical structures. At that time, people on Earth and Twin Earth would both use the word water to describe the clear, drinkable liquid they encounter in daily life. Neither group would know that the substances are chemically distinct. Despite this, Putnam argues that when people on Earth say water, they are referring specifically to H2O, and when people on Twin Earth say water, they are referring to XYZ. This suggests that the meaning of water is not determined only by what people know or believe, but also by the underlying nature of the substance in their environment. The thought experiment reveals a key idea. Meaning is partly determined by external reality, not just by our thoughts or definitions. When we say water, we are referring to the actual chemical substance H2O, even if we don't consciously know its chemical composition. This concept challenges the notion that meaning exists entirely in the mind. Instead, it suggests that meaning is a combination of internal understanding and external facts. To make this clearer, consider another example. Imagine two people, one on Earth and one on twin Earth, pointing to a glass of liquid and saying, "This is water." From their perspectives, they are both correct. The liquids they are describing look and feel identical. However, the meaning of their words is different because the substances are chemically distinct. The Earth person's water refers to H2O, while the twin Earth person's water refers to XYZ. The experiment shows that even when experiences and appearances are the same, the meaning of words can differ because of the underlying reality. This thought experiment also raises questions about how language evolves. In 1750, people on Earth didn't know that water was H2O. They used the word water to describe a clear, drinkable liquid. But once scientists discovered its chemical structure, the meaning of water became tied to H2O. This means that scientific knowledge can shape the meaning of words over time. The same would be true on twin Earth. When twin Earth scientists discovered that their water was XYZ, the meaning of their word water would become tied to its unique chemical structure. Putnam's experiment also challenges the idea of meaning as something that is purely in our minds. It suggests that meaning is not only about what we think, but also about the world we live in. For example, if an Earth scientist were to visit twin Earth and examine their water, they would discover that it is chemically different from H2O. Even though it looks and functions the same, it is not the same substance. This demonstrates that meaning depends on both perception and external reality. Our understanding of the world is shaped by the things we interact with, and these interactions influence the words we use and their meanings. The thought experiment also has implications for identity and uniqueness. If Earth and twin Earth are identical in every way, except for the composition of water, does this make them fundamentally different worlds? At first glance, the difference might seem small, but it reveals how even minor variations in reality can have a significant impact on meaning. This invites us to think about how much of our identity and understanding is shaped by the specific environment we live in. For example, consider a scenario where someone from Earth moves to twin Earth. They might initially think the twin Earth water is the same as what they knew on Earth. Over time, though, they might learn about the chemical difference and come to see XYZ as distinct from H2O. This change in understanding reflects how closely meaning is tied to context. The twin Earth thought experiment encourages us to think about the limits of our knowledge and how meaning evolves as we learn more about the world. One of the most thought-provoking aspects of this experiment is its relevance to modern questions about language and technology. In a world where artificial intelligence and machine learning systems process language, the twin Earth scenario highlights the importance of context. A machine might recognize the word water, but fail to grasp its deeper meaning if it doesn't understand the difference between H2O and XYZ. This shows how critical it is to connect language to the reality it describes. The twin Earth thought experiment also touches on questions about reality and perception. If two substances look and behave identically but are chemically different, does this distinction matter in everyday life? On one hand, people on both Earth and twin Earth would experience their respective waters in the same way. They would drink it, cook with it, and use it to sustain life. On the other hand, the difference in chemical composition makes the substances fundamentally distinct. This tension between appearance and reality challenges us to think about what truly defines something. In essence, the twin Earth thought experiment invites us to question how meaning is created and how it changes over time. It shows that meaning is not just about what we think or believe, but also about the world we interact with. By imagining a world so similar yet slightly different from our own, we gain new insights into the nature of language, knowledge, and reality. The experiment doesn't provide definitive answers, but it encourages us to think deeply about the connections between our minds, our words, and the world around us. In doing so, it reveals the complex and fascinating relationship between meaning and reality. The paradox of hedonism explores a simple yet perplexing truth. The more directly you pursue happiness, the less likely you are to find it. This idea seems counterintuitive. After all, isn't happiness something we all strive for? Shouldn't focusing on it lead us closer to achieving it? The paradox suggests otherwise, showing how the relentless pursuit of pleasure and satisfaction often leads to disappointment or emptiness. To understand the paradox, consider what happiness means. For many, happiness involves positive emotions, fulfillment, or a sense of contentment. These states, however, are often byproducts of other actions rather than something we can manufacture on demand. Think about laughter. It arises naturally in the moment, often from humor or joy. You cannot force yourself to laugh genuinely if there's nothing funny. Similarly, happiness is often a response to external or internal experiences, rather than something we can chase and grab. Imagine someone whose main goal in life is to be happy. They structure every decision, every action around maximizing their pleasure. They avoid challenges or commitments that might inconvenience them. They seek only the things that bring immediate gratification. While this might sound appealing on the surface, it often leads to dissatisfaction. Life becomes shallow and repetitive when everything revolves around chasing fleeting pleasures. The paradox lies in the realization that happiness often emerges not from chasing it directly, but from engaging in meaningful activities or pursuing goals outside of oneself. Take relationships as an example. If someone approaches a friendship or romantic relationship solely to make themselves happy, the dynamic often becomes self-centered. They may constantly assess whether the relationship is bringing them enough joy, rather than focusing on the needs of the other person or the connection itself. Ironically, this constant evaluation can erode the very bond that could have brought deep, genuine happiness. Relationships thrive when we prioritize others, show care, and invest in shared experiences. Happiness becomes a natural result of these actions rather than the central aim. The same applies to work and achievements. Consider someone who pursues a career solely for the promise of happiness. They might choose a job they think will make them happy, such as one with a high salary or minimal stress, but over time, they find it unfulfilling. Without a deeper sense of purpose or connection to the work, the joy they anticipated doesn't arrive. Compare this to someone who pursues a career out of passion or a desire to contribute something meaningful. The focus shifts from happiness to purpose, and happiness often follows as a result. The philosopher John Stuart Mill articulated this paradox well. He believed that happiness cannot be obtained by directly seeking it. Instead, it arises as a side effect of pursuing other goals. Mill observed that people who devote themselves to meaningful endeavors, whether it's a cause, a creative pursuit, or helping others, often find themselves happier than those who focus solely on their own pleasure. By turning attention outward, happiness finds its way inward. The paradox also reveals itself in the context of pleasure. Short-term pleasures, like eating a favorite dessert or buying something new, can bring a brief boost of happiness. But when we rely too heavily on these pleasures, their impact diminishes over time. Psychologists refer to this as hedonic adaptation. Once the initial thrill fades, we return to our baseline level of happiness, often leaving us wanting more. Chasing pleasure in this way can become a cycle, where each new pursuit feels less satisfying than the last. A practical example is the difference between material possessions and experiences. Studies consistently show that experiences, like traveling, spending time with loved ones, or learning something new, bring more lasting happiness than buying things. This is because experiences connect us to others, help us grow, and create memories that remain meaningful over time. Material possessions, on the other hand, quickly lose their novelty, leaving us craving the next purchase. Again, the paradox appears. Happiness grows not from trying to have more, but from living fully in ways that enrich our lives. Another layer to the paradox is how happiness often involves effort or sacrifice. Think of training for a marathon. The process is physically demanding and often uncomfortable. Yet, when the race is completed, the sense of accomplishment and pride can be profound. Similarly, raising a child or working on a difficult project can involve stress, fatigue, and frustration. But these experiences are also some of the most rewarding because they connect us to a sense of purpose. In contrast, avoiding effort in favor of constant ease often leads to boredom or a sense of stagnation. Happiness also depends on how we perceive it. When we obsess over whether we're happy enough, we often become less satisfied. This constant self monitoring can make even good experiences feel insufficient. For instance, someone might plan a dream vacation with the sole purpose of being happy. If they spend the trip analyzing whether they're having enough fun, they may miss the moments of joy happening around them. Happiness flourishes when we're present and engaged, not when we constantly measure it. The paradox of hedonism doesn't mean we should ignore happiness altogether. Instead, it challenges us to think differently about how we pursue it. Rather than chasing happiness directly, we can focus on the things that make life meaningful. Building relationships, contributing to others, engaging in hobbies, and pursuing goals that align with our values. By shifting our attention away from happiness as the primary goal, we often find it in unexpected ways. This idea aligns with ancient philosophies like Stoicism and Buddhism. Both emphasize the importance of living in harmony with one's values and accepting life's challenges rather than seeking constant pleasure. Stoics believe that true happiness comes from virtue, not external rewards. Buddhists teach that attachment to pleasure leads to suffering, and that inner peace comes from letting go of the need to always feel happy. These perspectives remind us that the pursuit of happiness often involves stepping back from the chase. In modern psychology, the concept of flow illustrates this idea well. Flow occurs when we're fully immersed in an activity, whether it's playing music, painting, or solving a problem. During flow, we lose track of time and focus entirely on the task. Paradoxically, these moments of intense engagement are often when people feel happiest. They're not thinking about happiness at all. They're simply absorbed in what they're doing. This reinforces the idea that happiness is a byproduct of meaningful activity, not the result of chasing pleasure directly. The paradox of hedonism encourages us to reevaluate our approach to life. It shows that happiness is less about the pursuit itself and more about the journey, about how we live, connect, and grow. It's not that happiness is unimportant, it's that it flourishes when we're focused on something greater than ourselves. By embracing this paradox, we can live fuller, richer lives where happiness is not the goal, but a natural companion along the way.